I never thought the day would come when I would stand in the middle of that airport with my chest tightening, like someone had placed a heavy stone on it, and my thoughts spinning so fast I could barely hold on to a single clear idea. The noise of rolling suitcases and loudspeaker. Announcements felt distant, like they were coming from underwater, and none of it made sense because all I could think about was how the one person I welcomed into my family with open arms had made a choice that cut right through me. I am a man in my 50s, and I have lived long enough to see days that tested my patience and shaped my character. I have lived through cold winters, hot summers, long work nights, and silent mornings when life felt too heavy to carry. But even with all that experience and all those years under my belt, I was not prepared for the morning. I realized something was terribly wrong. The discovery hit me before the sun even fully rose. I had been up early, sitting at my kitchen table with a warm cup of coffee, letting the smell of it drift around my small, quiet house. I remember looking round that kitchen and thinking how good life felt in that moment. I was proud of myself because after working so many years fixing fences, repairing porches, and patching broken pipes around town, I had finally saved enough to take my son and his wife on a real vacation. Not just a weekend road trip, but a proper break with blue ocean water and warm breezes and the type of peace a man my age longs for. I had looked forward to it more than I ever said out loud. I had planned every detail down to the smallest thing because I wanted this trip to heal whatever distance had grown between me and my son. I believed it would be the moment we laughed together again. The moment we sat beside the water as a family and let all the old misunderstandings fade away. It felt like hope. It felt like a chance to get him back. So when I walked into my bedroom to grab my passport, I felt light-hearted and hopeful. In my mind, I could already hear the sound of the ocean and feel the warm sun on my face. But the second I pulled that drawer open, my whole world seemed to stop. It was one of those moments where your breath catches in your throat and your heart stops for half a beat, because something feels off in a way you cannot explain. The drawer was empty, not messy, not disorganized, not shuffled. Completely empty, like the passport had been lifted out with care. I stood still, staring at it while the room around me felt like it was shrinking. I told myself maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe I had tucked it somewhere else and forgotten. But deep down, something old and instinctive stirred inside me. I have lived more than 50 years, and in that time you learn to trust your gut because it has seen more than your eyes ever will. And my gut told me this was not an accident. The passport had not disappeared. It had been taken. I checked my nightstand, then the kitchen table, then the coat pockets, then the shelf near the door. I looked under piles of mail and behind books, and even inside my old work bag, even though I knew it would not be there. Every place I searched only made the fear inside me grow stronger, because I realized with each empty spot that someone had done this on purpose. Someone had walked into my home, touched my things, and removed the one document I needed more than anything that day. At first, I did not want to think the worst. I told myself it had to be a mistake. But the more I stood there, the more my mind replayed all the strange little moments from the week before. The way my son's wife kept asking me questions about where I stored my important papers. The way she hovered near my things when she came by. The way she smiled that small, tight smile whenever the vacation came up. It was a smile too controlled, too polished, like someone pretending to care but hiding something underneath. And as I stood in the dim morning light holding the edge of that empty drawer, I felt something cold settle inside my chest. A slow, heavy knowledge that I did not want to admit even to myself. I reckon, mate, that feeling was like a whisper telling me that someone in my own family had betrayed my trust, and it felt like a crack forming right down the middle of my heart. But even then, I could not speak it out loud. I just stood there, gripping the edge of that drawer, while the weight of that missing passport pressed on me harder than anything I had felt in a long time. It was not just a document. It was the key to a moment I had waited years for. A chance to reconnect with my son. A chance to feel like a father again. Losing it felt like someone had ripped that moment right out of my hands. So I closed the drawer slowly, trying to steady my breathing. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking. I tried to convince myself it would turn up somewhere. But no matter how many comforting thoughts I tried to force into my head, the truth sat there in my chest like a stubborn stone. Someone had taken it. Someone wanted me to miss that flight. Someone wanted me to stay behind, and I had no idea why. That confusion mixed with hurt and disbelief made the air feel heavier around me. The quiet house that once felt peaceful now felt unsettling, like shadows were hiding secrets I had not seen before. I stood there in the middle of my bedroom, knowing that nothing about this trip would go the way I had imagined. I felt the first sting of betrayal curling its way round my ribs, and that was only the beginning, if you want. I can now continue section 1 in the same long, detailed human style. My name is Daniel, and I turned 56. Just a few months ago, and sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see the lines around my eyes getting deeper, but I also see a man who has lived a life filled with work, sweat, and simple joys. I have always been a small-town handyman, the kind of bloke people call when a fence leans too far, or when an old porch starts sagging, or when a shed door refuses to stay shut. I am not the kind of man who earns stacks of money or lives in a big fancy house with shiny floors. I live in a modest place that smells like fresh wood and coffee and old memories. I never bothered chasing some grand life because I always believed that peace comes from the simple things. A warm morning, a steady job, a quiet evening with a cup of tea, and most of all family. My son Michael was always the heart of my life. From the day he learned to walk to the day he finished school, he had been my pride. I raised him mostly on my own after his mother passed, and every little victory he had felt like something we both achieved together. But life changes people, and time builds little walls that you do not notice until they are too tall to see over. When he married Tara, things shifted in a way I never expected. At first, I thought it was just the natural change when a child grows up and starts a new life with someone they love. I told myself it was normal that he would call less or visit less because marriage brings new responsibilities and new routines. But as months turned into years, I could feel something more than distance forming. It felt like a curtain slowly being pulled between us, making the connection we once had fade little by little. Tara never outright disrespected me, but there was something in her that never sat right with me. She spoke to me with this polite tone that felt as stiff as a wooden board. Her smile was neat and practiced, but never warm. It was the kind of smile people use when they are trying to be pleasant, but hoping you do not come too close. I tried to overlook it. I told myself she was shy or unsure of me, or maybe just adjusting to the family. I tried to give her kindness at every chance because that is what a decent man does. But even when I offered kindness, it felt like she accepted it with a thin layer of ice still between us. I kept trying though. I always believed that if you give someone time, they will eventually show their true heart. But the truth is, mate, sometimes time just reveals what was already there. And that feeling of something being off kept growing in the back of my mind like a slow drifting fog that blocked the view little by little, so when the idea of taking a family vacation came to me, it felt like the perfect chance to break that fog apart. I thought maybe if we stepped out of our everyday routines and went somewhere beautiful and peaceful, we could find our way back to the ease we once had. I wanted us to laugh again. I wanted to sit with my son and talk about life like we used to. I wanted Tara to see that I was not someone she had to keep at a distance. I wanted her to feel comfortable enough to let me in. So I began planning. I booked the airline tickets months ahead, choosing a destination that had lived in my imagination for years. A place with warm sunlight that settles gentle on your shoulders and an ocean that stretches so far the sky and water look like one. I chose a resort that looked peaceful and calm, the type where a man can breathe without feeling the weight of the world on his back. I paid for everything out of my own pocket because I wanted this to be my gift, something that showed how much I cared for them and how much I wanted our family to stay connected. But when you want something too much, sometimes you ignore the signs that tell you something is wrong. And looking back now, I see all those signs clear as day. In the weeks before the trip, Tara began acting different. She was nervous in this uneasy way that made her hands move too quickly and her voice tighten in the middle of a sentence. Every now and then she would ask questions that made no sense at the time, like who keeps your important papers, Daniel, or where do you store your passport, or do you handle your travel documents yourself? I remember laughing it off, telling her I kept things in the same place for years, but even when I answered, she listened with this strange intensity, like she was taking notes in her mind. I did not want to assume anything bad. I brushed it off like a fool. I thought maybe she was trying to help me pack, or maybe she was curious because she was nervous about traveling. I reckon that is the thing about trust. When you trust someone or want to trust someone, you ignore the whispers inside you telling you to look closer. And that is exactly what I did. I ignored every odd moment and every awkward question. I let those little breadcrumbs blend into the background because I never once believed she could have a reason to interfere with something that meant so much to me, but those tiny details were not harmless at all. They were quiet warnings, small hints that something was slowly shifting behind me while I walked forward blind, and I had no idea that one simple vacation that meant everything to me was about to become the moment that changed my life and opened my eyes wider than they had ever been before. If you want, I can now continue section 2 in the same long, emotional human style. The morning we were supposed to leave felt like one of those rare days when the world lines up perfectly with your hopes. I woke before my alarm even buzzed because the excitement was already moving through me like warm electricity. It was the kind of excitement I had not felt in years. The sky outside my window was painted with a soft pale light that promised a beautiful day ahead, and for a moment I stood there just breathing it in, letting myself believe that this day was going to mark a new beginning for my family. I brewed my usual cup of coffee, letting the rich smell float through my little kitchen, and I sat at the table, sipping it slow, letting the warmth settle deep inside my chest. I kept glancing at the clock, not because I was late, but because I could not wait. I felt like a child again, counting down to something magical. I kept imagining the ocean and imagining Michael laughing beside me the way he used to when he was young and fearless. I imagined Tara relaxing by the water, maybe finally letting go of whatever walls she kept between us. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, truly hopeful. I finished my coffee, set the mug down, and felt a lightness in my step as I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom. I was humming a small tune without even realizing I was doing it. Everything inside me felt ready for that trip. Ready for the fresh air, the new memories, the healing I desperately wanted between me and my son. It felt like life was giving me one more chance to get things right, but the world has a strange way of shifting from warm to cold in an instant. I pulled open the drawer where I always kept my passport, and something inside me just stopped. It was not missing in the sense of misplaced or shuffled under papers. It was simply gone. The space was empty in a way that looked intentional, clean, precise, untouched by messy searching hands. My breath left my chest so fast it felt like someone had pushed hard against me. I stared at that empty spot and felt my heart thud slow and heavy like a drum echoing. In an empty room, I reached into the drawer, running my fingers across the smooth bottom as if maybe the passport would suddenly appear under my touch. I checked the corners even though I knew it had never been tucked there. I closed the drawer, then pulled it open again, hoping I had made some mistake, but it was still empty. Completely empty. That empty space felt louder than any sound in the room. I started moving around my house, searching for something I knew I would not find, but my mind refused to accept it. I checked the table where I sometimes placed my mail. I checked the kitchen counters. I even checked behind the stack of bills and the old tools I had left near the back door. I opened my coat pocket, even though my passport had never been there a single day in my life. I checked the shelf near the entrance, then retraced my steps through the entire house. With each place I searched, the realization settled deeper and colder in my chest. This was not misplaced. This was not forgotten. This was removed. After nearly 20 minutes, I found myself standing in the middle of my living room, surrounded by silence so thick it felt like it had weight to it. A painful clarity washed over me. This had been done intentionally. Someone had come into my house, opened my drawer, and taken the one document I needed to get on that plane. There was no other explanation. I am a man in my 50s, and I have lived long enough to know the difference between a simple mistake and a deliberate act. And this had the clean, quiet fingerprints of intention all over it. At first I felt disbelief. Who would want to keep me from going on a trip that meant nothing but joy? Who could possibly care enough about my presence or absence to take something so important? The thought felt ridiculous at first, because I have lived my whole life in a small town where people barely bother to lock their doors. I am not the kind of man who makes enemies. I mind my own business and offer help whenever someone needs it. So the idea that someone would sabotage my trip seemed impossible. But then my mind began replaying the small, subtle moments from the days before. Tara's odd questions, the way she hovered behind me while I packed my suitcase, the way her eyes flicked toward my nightstand like she was measuring something in her head. I remembered the way she had smiled the day before when she said she hoped everything would go smoothly. It was not a warm smile. It was tight around the edges, like she was forcing it to stay in place. I had brushed all those moments aside, but now they came back sharp and clear, like little clues I had ignored. A cold, quiet anger began to rise inside me, not the loud kind that makes you shout. This was the heavy, slow kind that settles deep in your bones like a storm rolling in from far away. It started as a small spark in my chest, then grew warmer as the truth built itself piece by piece inside my head. Tara had wanted me to miss that trip. She had prepared for it long before this morning arrived. She had asked those questions for a reason. She had been waiting for this moment. But what I could not understand was why. Why would she want to keep me behind? Why would she try to ruin something that meant so much to me and meant something to my son too? What did she gain from this? What had I done to deserve such quiet cruelty? I stood there with my hands planted on my hips and my breath trembling with questions that hit harder than the missing passport itself. I felt betrayed, but more than that, I felt confused in a way that hurt deeper than anger ever could. Family is supposed to be the one place where your back is safe, the one place where betrayal should never come from. And yet here I was, standing in my own home, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and taken something precious without a hint of guilt. I felt the old familiar ache of loneliness creeping in the same ache I felt after my wife passed, the kind that makes your house feel too big and your heart too small. The day I had been waiting for was shifting into something dark, something I had not planned for. The warm, hopeful morning was gone, replaced by a quiet heaviness that wrapped around me like a cold fog. And as I stood there, trying to understand what had happened, I knew, deep in my gut, that this was only the beginning. The real reason behind Tara's actions was still hidden, and whatever it was, I had a feeling it would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The moment I stepped out of my house and saw Michael's car pull into the driveway, I felt a mix of relief and dread battling inside my chest. Relief, because I didn't have to face this mess alone. Dread, because I didn't know how I was supposed to tell my son, my only son, that something felt terribly wrong, and that the person who might be behind it was sitting just a few feet away from him every single day. I forced my face into something that looked like a smile, even though my insides were anything but calm. My hands shook just a little as I grabbed my small suitcase, and when I opened the car door, the warm morning air seemed to slip right past me like I wasn't even there. Michael greeted me with his usual upbeat voice, the kind that sounded like he still had hope for the world. He was talking about the weather, the resort, his overpacked suitcase, everything that made him feel excited about this trip. But when my eyes glanced toward the back seat, I saw Tara sitting there, legs crossed neatly, hands resting in her lap, and on her face was that expression, soft, sweet, but off. She was smiling just a bit, but there was something behind that smile, something cold, something that made my stomach twist. It was a look a person gives when they know something you don't, a look of satisfaction wrapped in politeness. I settled into the passenger seat, adjusting myself slowly, trying to gather the strength to speak. The ride started, the car humming along the road, the sun rising higher, casting long shadows across the pavement. Michael kept talking, filling the silence, trying to keep the energy high and hopeful. I wished I could match it. I wished the morning felt as easy to me as it did to him. But the weight of that missing passport kept pressing on my chest. Finally, I cleared my throat, the sound breaking through the light chatter in the car. I told Michael, as calmly as I could, that I couldn't find my passport, that I had searched every drawer, every corner, every shelf. His smile faded, and his eyebrows pulled together in confusion. He asked me the usual questions. Did you check the drawer? Did you look in your jacket? Your bedside table? Questions I had already gone through 100 times in my head before he even pulled into the driveway. I told him yes, I checked everything. Everything. Then Tara leaned forward, resting one arm on the back of Michael's seat. Her voice came out soft, almost too soft, like honey mixed with something bitter. Maybe you misplaced it, Daniel, she said. The words were harmless on the surface, but the tone held a quiet edge. A faint flicker glimmered in her eyes, a spark that didn't belong to concern. It was something closer to satisfaction, something hidden behind a mask she wore so well. The moment she spoke, my stomach tightened. There was a rhythm inside my chest, slow and heavy, as if my body understood what my mind was still trying to wrap itself around. I watched her through the rearview mirror. She sat back again, straightening her posture, smoothing out her pants like she was pleased with herself. That small expression on her lips, that tiny tug that almost became a smirk but didn't quite cross the line that told me more than any words ever could. She knew something. She knew exactly what had happened to my passport. As the car moved along the highway, trees blurring past the windows, I felt myself drifting into my thoughts. I kept remembering the past few days, the subtle way she kept stepping into my bedroom pretending to help me pack, the way her eyes darted to my drawer when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she asked questions that didn't make sense at the time. Each memory was like a puzzle piece sliding into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see, a picture of betrayal hiding right inside my own family. Michael kept talking, trying to figure out solutions. Maybe we could go to passport control. Maybe we could adjust the tickets. Maybe everything would still work out. That's the kind of man he is. He always tries to fix things. But I stayed quiet, staring out the window, watching the world pass by like I wasn't part of it. I didn't want to ruin his morning. I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. So I swallowed my anger, letting it simmer quietly inside, letting it sit just beneath the surface like boiling water waiting for a lid to lift. But the more I sat there, the more I kept thinking, if Tara did take it, what was her plan? What did she want? Why would she go so far to keep me from joining them? The questions tangled in my head like vines, tightening the more I tried to pull them apart. I stayed silent, letting the car ride unfold like a scene I was stuck inside. I wanted to see how far she would let this go, how far she would take her lies, how long she could pretend, because deep down I knew the truth was coming, and when it showed itself, it would change everything. The airport was alive in that overwhelming way only airports can be. People dragging suitcases, families arguing softly, couples rushing arm in arm, the loudspeaker calling out flight numbers like some mechanical voice that had no idea how many human stories depended on every word it spoke. The air smelled faintly of coffee, cologne, and the excitement of people heading off to new places. But for me, all that movement and noise felt distant, like I was standing in the middle of a storm, but completely dry, untouched, sealed inside my own world of confusion and anger. We made our way toward the check-in counter. Michael walked ahead with our paperwork clutched in his hands. He was trying to look calm, trying to hold himself together, trying to believe the morning could still be saved. Tara walked beside him, pretending to be the image of composure, the quiet, supportive wife by her husband's side. But every few seconds, she turned her head just enough to look at me. And there it was, that little smile she tried to hide, the one that never reached her eyes. A smile of satisfaction, a smile of someone who thought she had already won. I felt my jaw tighten as I watched her. It wasn't loud anger, it was deeper, quieter, like a heavy stone sinking slowly into dark water. I couldn't shake the thought that something was terribly wrong, and the worst part was knowing I couldn't say a word. Not yet, not without proof, not without dragging my son into a storm he still didn't understand. Michael finished the paperwork and we moved forward in line. His shoulders were a little tense, his movements a little stiff. He kept trying to reassure me things would be fine, that maybe the airline could help, Maybe there was some backup option. Maybe, just maybe, everything would work out. He was clinging to hope because that's the type of man he is. He believes in fixing things. He believes in people, and I didn't want to break that part of him. Then it was my turn. The airline agent asked for my passport in that routine tone they always use, as if the entire world depends on a simple document. I looked at Michael, then at Tara, then back at the agent. "My passport," I said, quietly, "is gone." The words felt heavy as they left my mouth. Heavy like a truth I never wanted to speak. The agent blinked at me, confused at first, then gave me that professional kind of pity you see from people who have delivered bad news too many times. She shook her head, her lips pressed together as she told me there was nothing she could do. No passport meant no travel, no exceptions. Michael let out a breath that sounded like his whole body had deflated. His face felt disappointment, guilt, frustration, all blending together. He ran a hand across his forehead, like maybe he could rub away the problem if he tried hard enough. I could see how much he wanted me there, how much he had been looking forward to this. But his voice trembled just a little as he asked what we should do. Before I could speak, Tara slid in with her perfect timing, placing a hand on Michael's arm like she was comforting him, even though her fingers curled just a bit too tightly. "Maybe we should still go," she said softly. "It would be a shame to waste all the money. Your dad would want that, right?" Her tone was polite, but underneath it, I heard something else: eagerness, relief, triumph, a cold desire for me to stay behind because she wanted something I wasn't supposed to witness. The words dripped with a kind of false kindness, the kind that cuts deeper than cruelty. Michael hesitated, his eyes moving back and forth between us. He looked torn in half, like he didn't want to leave me, but also didn't want to lose the trip he had been excited for. And in that moment, I made a choice, a painful one, but the right one. I couldn't let my hurt drag him down. I couldn't let my suspicions poison the one relationship I cherished more than anything. So I nodded, slowly, firmly. "Go," I told him. "You to go and enjoy the vacation. I'll figure things out here." My voice was steady, even though my insides felt like they were twisting. Michael hugged me tightly, apologizing over and over. Tara gave me a polite goodbye, her lips pulling into that same quiet smile, the one that told me she thought this was the end of it, that she had won. But as I stood there, watching them walk toward security, Michael, looking back at me with guilt, Tara walking ahead confidently like nothing could touch her, something inside me shifted. A new feeling rose from the ashes of disappointment. Something sharper, stronger, a quiet fire lit deep inside my chest, burning slow but steady. It wasn't rage, not the loud kind, and it wasn't sadness anymore either. It was something older, wiser, the kind of feeling a man gets when he finally decides he's done being stepped on, done being disrespected, done letting someone manipulate the family he spent his whole life protecting. A promise formed in my mind, silent but powerful. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to walk home defeated. I was going to find out what she did, why she did it, and I was going to uncover the truth she thought she had buried. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning of the fire. When I walked back into my house, the silence felt heavier than usual. The walls felt closer, the air felt still, and my own footsteps echoed like I was the only living soul left in the whole world. I closed the door behind me and just stood there for a moment, letting everything settle in my chest. The airport The look on Tara's face, the strain in Michael's voice, the disbelief that had cracked through me all morning. It all kept circling round and around like a restless bird refusing to land. I sank onto the couch and stared at the floor. My mind was replaying every moment of the last week like someone kept hitting the rewind button over and over. I remembered the strange questions Tara asked, the way she kept lingering near my room even when there was no reason for her to be there, the way she smiled too politely when something went wrong, and the way she looked at me in the car when I mentioned the missing passport. That tiny glimmer in her eyes that didn't belong in a moment like that. I felt anger sitting in my chest, but it wasn't the kind that explodes. It was the heavy, quiet anger that settles deep and stays steady. But under it was something even sharper. Betrayal. The kind that doesn't strike quick. The kind that seeps into you slow, like cold water, filling your boots one step at a time until you suddenly realize you are standing in a depth you never expected. I took a slow breath and pushed myself up. I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom. My hand brushed the door frame as I stepped inside. Everything looked normal at first glance, but that is the thing about betrayal. It hides in the tiny details. The things you only notice when you are already suspicious. I moved toward the drawer where I kept old papers, small memories, coins I didn't want to lose. I pulled it open, and at first all I saw were my shirts folded neatly. Too neatly. Not in the natural way I fold them after laundry, but tight, smooth, precise. Like someone had repacked them with intention. My stomach tightened. I reached in and lifted the shirts one by one, and there it was. A tiny slip of paper. Something so small it could have been blown away by a soft breath. But it felt heavier than a stone in my palm. A dry cleaning tag. I knew the handwriting instantly. I had seen it on grocery lists, holiday cards, little notes stuck to the fridge at my son's house. It was Tara handwriting. She had been inside this drawer. She had moved my things. She had stood right here in my home, touching my belongings without my knowledge. And for what reason other than the one that now shone clear as day in my mind? She had taken my passport. The realization didn't hit me like thunder. It settled in quietly like a cold truth I should have seen earlier. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at that little slip of paper like it was a confession. She had signed without knowing, by hands curled around it slowly. I felt a deep, steady breath fill my chest. Revenge is not something a man like me jumps toward lightly. I am too old to be reckless, to experience, to act on emotion alone. I have lived long enough to know that true justice takes patience. It takes calm. It takes a mind that is clear even when the heart is hurting. So I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I didn't collapse into anger. I stood up with a strange calm settling into my bones. Because now I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't assuming. I wasn't suspecting. I knew, and once a man knows the truth, the plan begins. I walked back into the living room and stood in the middle of it, feeling that quiet fire start to burn again. Not wild, controlled, focused. The kind of fire that changes everything. When used the right way, I whispered to myself like a promise carried through the room. This was not over. Not by a long shot. The more I thought about what Tara had done, the clearer everything became. She believed she had pulled off the perfect trick. She believed the missing passport would just look like an old man mistake. Like I had simply misplaced it or forgotten where I put it. She expected me to shrug it off and accept it as bad luck. She expected me to stay quiet, to stay harmless, to stay in my lane. That was her biggest miscalculation. Because a man my age doesn't fall apart from being fooled. He learns, he watches, and he waits. I realized something as I sat there in my living room holding that dry cleaning tag. Tara wasn't just bold. She was confident, too confident. And there is nothing more dangerous than someone who thinks they cannot be caught. When a person believes they are already safe, already successful, already victorious, they start getting sloppy. They start taking bigger risks. They stop looking over their shoulder. And that, right there, is the moment when truth reveals itself. So I decided I wouldn't confront her right away. I wouldn't call Michael in a panic. I wouldn't start an argument that could be twisted against me. No, I would let her settle into her own false comfort. I would let her believe she had tricked me. I would let her relax, breathe easy, and let her guard down. People expose themselves when they think they have already won. With that thought settled in my mind, I got up and grabbed my truck keys. I drove across town to see an old friend of mine named Rick. He runs a little business doing property, installation and repairs. Cameras, alarms, security lights, all those things. We have known each other since we were teenagers. He is the type of friend who understands without needing a long explanation. When I walked into his workshop, he lifted his head, saw my face. I knew something was wrong before I said a single word. I sat on an old metal stool while he tinkered with a toolbox. I told him I needed a small camera installed near the entry hallway of my house. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just something discreet. Something that would capture anyone who walked through the door or hovered around the common area. I made sure he understood I wasn't trying to spy on anyone in private spaces. I didn't want that. I only wanted evidence if Tara ever tried snooping again. I wanted a clear picture of the truth, not secrets. Rick didn't ask too many questions, but the concern in his eyes spoke loud enough. He handed me a tiny device barely bigger than a thumb. Something simple that blended into the wall like a little black dot. He said it would store recordings automatically and that I could access it easily if I ever needed to. We drove to my place that same afternoon. He installed the camera in less than 30 minutes, placing it near the hallway wall where nobody would ever think to look. It didn't point toward bedrooms or personal areas, just the common walking space, the place anyone would pass through if they entered the house. I stood there watching him, feeling a strange mix of sadness and determination. I never thought I would reach a point where protecting myself from my own family felt necessary. But life teaches you things in the most unexpected ways. When the camera was installed, I thanked Rick, shook his hand, and told him I owed him one. He slapped my shoulder and told me to call if I needed anything else. I watched him drive away, feeling a sense of quiet readiness settle in me. The first piece of the plan was in place, but the next part would require something more delicate, something more personal. I would need Tara to come back into my house willingly. I needed her to feel comfortable enough to make the same mistake twice. So I made a decision that surprised even me. I would invite them for dinner the week they returned from their vacation. I pictured the scene in my head. Tara walking into my home like nothing had happened, acting sweet and innocent. Michael smiling, thinking it was just a normal dinner. The two of them sitting at my table, enjoying a meal like we were a happy family. She would never expect what was coming. The trick, though, was to make everything feel natural. I had to sound warm. I had to sound forgiving. I had to sound like a man who had accepted his bad luck and was ready to move on. So the day after they flew back, I picked up my phone and called Michael. I wished him a warm welcome home. I asked how the trip went. I told him I wanted to hear all about it over dinner. He was excited, relieved even. He said yes, without hesitation. Tara's quiet voice drifted through the speaker, polite but stiff. She didn't sound happy about the invitation, but she couldn't refuse without looking guilty. That was the first moment I felt a shift in the air, a sense that the story was finally turning in my direction. Part 1 of my plan was simple. Let her believe she had won. Let her settle into her own. Lie, let her walk into my home thinking the storm had passed, because the truth was waiting for her. Quiet, hidden, patient, and the moment she stepped through my door again, everything she thought she controlled would start slipping out of her hands. That evening felt strange from the moment I opened the door. It was like the air inside my own home had shifted, carrying a quiet tension that only I could feel. When Tara and Michael stepped in, the first thing I noticed was the way Tara carried herself, looser shoulders, an easier smile, a laugh that sounded just a little too bright, too practiced, like someone trying to convince the world they had nothing to hide. Michael, on the other hand, looked sun-kissed and energized from their little getaway, practically glowing with the leftover excitement of beaches and cocktails and late night adventures he probably wished I'd ask about. He held up his phone before I could even offer them a seat, scrolling through photos of the resort, the food, the water sports. He was like a teenager showing off after summer break. And the whole time, Tara watched me from the corner of her eye, like a student waiting to see if the teacher had discovered she cheated on the test. I welcomed them in with the same warm tone I'd used their entire lives, as if nothing in my world had been flipped upside down. I made sure my face stayed loose, my smile easy, the perfect image of a clueless, harmless old dad. I asked about the food they'd tried. I commented on the bright blue ocean in their pictures. I chuckled at the stories Michael rushed to tell me. I asked about the weather, the hotel, the views. I played the script so flawlessly that even I almost believed it. But inside, I wasn't listening to a single word in the way they expected. Inside, I was watching everything: Tara's subtle glances, the way she kept her hands clasped in her lap, the way she looked anywhere but directly into my eyes when she answered my questions. Every time she laughed, I saw the tightness around her mouth. Every time she shifted in her seat, I wondered if she was imagining the text messages she didn't want me to see, the things she thought she had covered up, the truth she prayed I hadn't uncovered. The dinner itself felt long, almost slow motion. Forks clinked, glasses scraped lightly against the table, and the small talk hovered like a fog around us. Michael was animated, oblivious, still glowing from what he believed was a harmless trip. Tara kept going quiet every time he got too enthusiastic, like his energy made her guilt louder, and I just sat there, nodding along, offering refills, asking questions, all the while studying the way her fingers tapped against the napkin every time Michael mentioned the resort. It was almost funny she was worried about the wrong thing. She thought she was hiding an affair. She didn't realize she had exposed something much darker, much more deliberate. Eventually, it grew late, and they started preparing to leave. It should have been an ordinary moment, the kind of simple ending to a family dinner that no one thinks twice about. But Tara turned to me with this tiny, almost rehearsed smile and asked, "Can I use your bathroom before we go?" Her tone was casual, too casual, and I could feel my stomach tighten. Not because I was nervous, but because I already knew exactly why she wanted to wander down that hallway. I nodded calmly and pointed her in the right direction, pretending to be focused on clearing plates. But in reality, I was counting the seconds, listening to the soft echo of her footsteps. I imagined the hallway, the shelf, the exact drawer she was headed toward, the one she thought mattered. The one she thought still held the secret she needed to know, and right on cue, she paused. I didn't see it with my eyes, but I felt it knew it because I knew her tells. When someone is guilty, their movements leave a trail, even in the silence. She stopped near the shelf. I could picture her pretending to adjust her sweater, pretending to glance at a photo frame. Then her hand reached out, not to open the drawer fully, but to test it, to touch the handle, to check for even the slightest difference, to see if my passport, the one she had tried to get her hands on, had been returned. She looked over her shoulder, just for a second, the way people do when they're certain they're being watched, even when they believe they're alone. She didn't know a camera was angled perfectly down that hallway. She didn't know every movement was being captured. She didn't know the trap had already closed around her long before she touched that drawer. When she came back into the living room, she tried to act normal again, but something in her expression had changed, like she had just swallowed something bitter and couldn't get the taste out of her mouth. Michael didn't notice a thing. He was too busy putting on his shoes and thanking me for dinner. Terror avoided my eyes, and I played my role perfectly, offering them leftovers, smiling gently, saying goodnight like nothing at all had happened. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, the house fell silent, and I walked straight to the console where the footage was stored. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't hitch. I already knew what I would find. I just needed to see it with my own eyes. I pressed play. There she was, Tara, moving quietly down the hall. Tara, pretending to be on her way to the bathroom. Tara, slowing her steps. Tara, glancing back. Tara, reaching out with that calculated little touch, the way someone touches something they've touched before. She rested her fingers on the drawer, checking its position, testing its weight, confirming the exact thing she didn't want me to know. She had been in that drawer before. She had gone through my things. She had tried to take my passport. And tonight, she was checking to see if I had caught on. And as I watched her on the screen, frozen in that tiny moment of guilt, everything inside me went quiet, not angry, not hurt, just quiet. Because now I didn't have suspicions. I had proof. I let 7 long days pass before I made my move, not because I was uncertain, and not because fear held me back, but because timing matters when the truth needs space to breathe. I didn't want an explosion or a shouting match, or one of those chaotic scenes where everyone talks over each other and nothing gets resolved. I wanted stillness. I wanted clarity. I wanted justice delivered without theatrics, the kind of quiet justice that seeps into a person's bones and forces them to face what they've done. So I waited, patient, steady, carrying the truth like a small stone in my pocket, feeling its weight every time I reached for it. Each morning of that week, I woke up with the same image in my head, Tara pausing at the drawer, her hand hovering, her guilt frozen in the grainy hallway footage. And every night I laid down knowing that the moment was approaching. The moment when all the pieces would finally fall into place. When the week was up, I called Michael and told him I needed help with something around the house. My voice was almost neutral, not warm, but not cold either, just steady. And he agreed without hesitation, like he always did, because he trusted me. That trust was something sacred to me, something I had never taken lightly, which made everything hurt in a deeper way than anger could ever reach. I spent the few hours before he arrived sitting in the living room, replaying the footage in my mind, preparing myself for what had to be said, what had to be shown when he knocked on the door. I felt the shift instantly, like the moment right before a storm breaks. I opened the door and saw him standing there, my son, the boy I had raised. Now a man with tired eyes and a smile that didn't fully reach anymore. I stepped aside and told him to come in. He walked in, expecting to fix a shelf or lift something heavy or maybe help me with some simple task. What he didn't know was that today he would see the truth unfiltered, raw, undeniable. "Sit down for a minute," I said, and something in my tone must have told him this wasn't about fixing anything in the house. He sat slowly, brows pinching together with caution, and I walked over to the small console where the footage was stored. My movements were deliberate, like each step was part of a choreography I had practiced in my head. I didn't speak right away. I simply tapped the file, and the screen lit up with the hallway. View Tara walking toward the bathroom. Tara slowing down, Tara glancing over her shoulder. Tara touching the drawer like she had done it before, like she knew its weight, its angle, its history. Michael watched with confusion at first, then concern, then a dawning horror that drained the color from his face. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists on his knees, and his breathing steady, even, relaxed when he walked, in-shifted into shallow, uneven pores of air. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face said everything, a quiet collapse happening behind his eyes. When the footage ended, the room went painfully silent, the kind of silence that wraps around your throat and squeezes. I sat down across from him and finally told him everything, what she had asked the morning of the trip, the strange questions she had no reason to ask, the way she had acted at the airport, the forced smile, the sudden change in behavior, the nervousness, the distance. I told him how she watched me during dinner like she was waiting for a confession that would never come from my lips. I laid it all out, gently, no anger, no dramatic pauses, just the truth, plain and steady. Michael didn't interrupt. He didn't move. He looked like a man who had just realized the world he thought he understood had a crack running, right through the center of it. Minutes passed before he finally spoke, and when he did, his voice wasn't even a voice, it was a breath, a whisper dragged from somewhere deep and painful. He said Tara had confessed something months ago, something he hadn't thought much about at the time, that she felt I was taking too much of his time, that she worried the vacation would bring us closer, make him choose me over her. She had felt threatened by the bond between a father and son, jealous of a relationship she was never meant to compete with, and she didn't want him spending time with me, certainly not traveling with me, laughing with me, reconnecting with me. Her jealousy wasn't loud or obvious, but it lived under her skin, shaping her choices, twisting her thoughts until she believed she had to interfere as he spoke. He kept his head down, rubbing his face with both hands, like he was trying to wipe away the truth. I watched his shoulders shake slightly, not with tears, but with the effort to hold himself together. There is a certain kind of heartbreak only a spouse can cause, and a different kind only a parent can witness. I felt both in that moment, his and mine. For me, a strange mix of sadness and relief settled over my chest. Sadness, because my son had been carrying the weight of a wife who didn't trust him, didn't trust his loyalty, didn't trust the bond he had with his own father. Sadness, because he had been put in the middle of something he never asked for, trapped between love and manipulation. But alongside that sadness came a quiet, undeniable relief. The truth was finally in the open. The lies had been stripped away. The shadows terror had created around us had dissolved in the light of what we now both saw clearly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask Michael to choose sides. I didn't accuse or push or judge. I simply let the truth sit between us, heavy and real, because it belonged there. Because it was time. And as he sat there, pale and silent, I knew this moment would stay with him forever. The footage, not the betrayal, but the clarity. The understanding that truth, when delivered calmly and without anger, cuts deeper than any yell ever could.
Michael sat in my living room for a long time after the truth had settled between us, his hands clasped together, his head lowered, his breathing uneven like he was trying to make sense of a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar. When he finally looked at me, there was a brokenness in his eyes I had never seen before, a quiet hurt that comes when a man realizes the person he trusts most has stabbed him with something sharper than any blade: deception. He swallowed hard and asked me the question that carried the weight of his entire future. "Dad, what do you want me to do?" His voice cracked just slightly, but enough to make my chest tighten. I took a slow breath and leaned back, letting the heaviness of the moment sit unchallenged in the air. I looked at my son, the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, the teenager who thought he knew everything, the man now sitting in front of me, desperate for guidance, and I knew I could not be the one to decide his path. So I spoke with the same calm that had guided me through this entire storm. I told him I did not want to destroy his marriage. I did not want to tear his world apart. I did not want revenge that scorched the earth he walked on. More than anything, I did not want to force him into a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "All I want," I said softly, "is the truth spoken out loud, and respect, the respect every man deserves." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the conflict pulling at him from every angle. He loved his wife, and he loved me, and somewhere between those two loves, a fault line had formed. He sat quietly for a long time before standing up with a determination that looked unfamiliar on him, sharper, older, heavier. He said he needed to talk to her that very evening. I watched him walk out the door, with steps that felt slower than usual, as if every footfall carried the weight of what was coming next. That evening, the confrontation happened in their home, behind the walls where marriage vows were supposed to mean something. Michael told me later that he walked in and found Tara sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, relaxed, unbothered, certain her secret had died the day they boarded that plane without me. When he told her they needed to talk, she barely lifted her eyes. At the moment he mentioned my passport, he saw it, the flicker, the panic, the split-second crack in her expression before she masked it. She tried to deny it at first, stumbling through weak excuses, claiming confusion, claiming maybe I lost it, claiming everything except the truth that was slowly cornering her. When he told her we had proof, real footage of her hand on that drawer, real evidence she couldn't spin or twist or bury, she broke down. Not a gentle cry, not the kind that softens a heart, but a messy collapse, a storm of guilt and fear and desperation. She admitted everything, every ugly detail. She said she hid my passport in her suitcase the night before they left, slipping it in between her dresses so that I wouldn't notice until it was too late. She confessed she wanted the trip to be only for them, just her and Michael, without me there to take attention, without me there to bond with him, without me rebuilding the closeness she saw as a threat. She cried hysterically, saying she didn't know how to handle her jealousy, that she feared losing him, that she acted out of insecurity and panic, not malice. But intentions don't erase consequences. Michael stood there listening, feeling every word like a bruise forming on his chest. He told her something that cut straight through the chaos, something simple and steady: love built on lies cannot survive. His voice was quiet, but strong, the kind of strength that comes from realizing what you will no longer tolerate. That sentence hung in the air between them, like a final verdict. Tara tried to reach for him, tried to explain, tried to blame her feelings, her upbringing, anything she could grasp, but Michael stepped back. For the first time, he saw the damage in clear daylight. He told her trust was not a small thing, respect was not optional, jealousy was not an excuse for sabotage. A marriage cannot stand when deceit rots the foundation. And the moment she chose to hide my passport, she didn't just betray me. She betrayed him, his faith, his loyalty, his belief that their life together was built on honesty. Later that night, he came back to my house. He didn't speak right away. He just sat beside me, exhausted, drained, wiped out in a way only truth can do to a person. Then he said something that made the entire room feel still. "Dad, you were right to stay calm." His voice trembled. "If you had shouted, if you had rushed, if you had acted in anger, I might have defended her. But the truth spoke for itself." He put his head in his hands, and I rested mine on his shoulder like I used to when he was a child, trying to soothe him through the storms of life. It was a quiet moment, heavy but honest. A moment where a father and son finally stood on the same side again, not because of revenge, but because truth had finally cleared the fog. The final moment was not loud. It was not dramatic. It did not come with yelling or slamming doors. It came with clarity, with a man realizing that the woman he loved had tampered with the bond he shared with his father, and with a father understanding that sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that save us from bigger destruction. The night ended not with rage, but with something else. Painful, complicated, necessary peace.